Imagine, just for a second, that you are trying to run like a global delivery business. But overnight, the world's most critical highways, the main bridges and arterial roads you rely on every single day to move your goods, they just suddenly shut down.
Yeah, that's practically the definition of a logistics nightmare right there.
Right. The routes are physically blocked.
Mm.
And on top of that, fuel costs are skyrocketing, and your competitors are just completely panicking. I mean, how do you survive that? Or better yet, how do you look at a map of total, unprecedented chaos and actually find a way to thrive?
Well, for most businesses, you really don't. When your infrastructure vanishes like that, the natural instinct is to just hunker down and, try to keep your head above water.
Exactly. And yet, there are companies navigating this exact scenario right now and posting record numbers. So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack the Q1 2026 earnings presentation from Global Ship Lease, or GSL.
Which is a fascinating document to go through.
It really is. This report was just released in May of 2026, and we are looking at their financial results, their overarching fleet strategy, and their real-time view of a completely chaotic global supply chain. Okay, let's unpack this, because we can't really understand how a company survives a geopolitical storm of this magnitude without first checking the strength of the boat they're sailing in. We need to start by looking at GSL's financial foundation.
Which is, remarkably heavily armored. You really don't navigate the kind of macro disruptions we are seeing globally right now without building a massive financial moat first.
Right. The numbers they reported are staggering, but I don't want us to just sit here and read a textbook. So, to give you listening a sense of the scale, in just the first quarter of 2026 alone, they pulled in nearly $198.1 million in revenue.
Yeah, which is massive.
It is, and their net income is sitting at over $91.4 million. Plus, their adjusted EBITDA is up to about $133.2 million.
And just to clarify that last metric for a second, adjusted EBITDA is essentially their core operating profitability. It stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
So it's kind of like the raw cash flow.
Exactly, yeah. It's a way of looking at the actual cash their day-to-day operations are generating, stripping away all that accounting noise. So hitting over $133 million in one quarter shows the engine is running incredibly hot.
Wow. But, the metric that actually stopped me in my tracks wasn't their past performance. It was their contract backlog. They have over $2.1 billion in revenue just locked in, stretching over an average of 2.6 years.
That is a huge safety net.
Right. For 2026, their fleet contract coverage is 100%. For 2027, it's already sitting at 86%. And they aren't leasing these ships to, fly-by-night operators either. We are talking top-tier blue-chip ocean carriers like MSC, Maersk, and Hapag-Lloyd.
And that backlog represents total visibility. In the maritime shipping industry, which is historically famous for wild, brutal, cyclical swings, having your revenue completely locked in for the current year and mostly locked in for the next is a structural advantage most companies dream of.
Yeah, to make sense of how they actually operate, I was thinking about their business model kind of like a commercial landlord. GSL doesn't actually move the containers. They aren't the ones selling the sneakers or the electronics inside those steel boxes.
Right, they don't touch the cargo.
Exactly. They just own the physical ships, the heavy machinery, and lease them out to the ocean carriers, who then deal with the actual cargo.
That framing is very helpful, honestly.
Yeah.
The distinction between the two roles is everything here. GSL provides the physical real estate of the ocean.
But wait, here's where I have to push back a little. If they are just the landlords, what happens when the global neighborhood starts deteriorating?
What do you mean?
Well, we know inflation has been hitting everything from labor to maintenance parts. If a carrier starts bleeding money because shipping routes are a mess, doesn't the landlord eventually suffer? How are these multi-year contracts actually safe if the underlying operating costs are surging?
It's a really vital question. To understand their insulation against inflation and market volatility, you have to look at the mechanical shock absorbers built into their model. The most critical number in this entire earnings presentation isn't their revenue, it's their break-even rate.
Okay.
For GSL, the average daily break-even rate per vessel is just $9,807.
Under $10,000 a day. Wait, how is that mathematically possible for a massive cargo ship?
It comes down to really strict cost control and debt management. That $9,807 covers everything: their operating expenses, the crew's wages, routine maintenance, and crucially, their interest payments on their debt.
Wow.
Now, to put that under $10,000 figure in context, current market charter rates for these types of ships are sitting anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000 a day, depending on the exact size.
So their baseline operating cost is just a tiny fraction of what the asset brings in daily.
Correct. And they managed to drive that break-even rate down largely by tackling their debt. They've aggressively paid down their obligations, bringing their gross debt down to around $657.8 million.
Which lowers their interest burden.
Exactly. And they've secured a pro forma cost of debt, which is essentially their blended interest rate at a remarkably low 4.83%.
Oh, I see. So they basically refinanced the mortgages on their ships at a great rate and paid down the principal.
Yes, exactly. And by deleveraging their balance sheet and securing those long-term fixed-rate leases, they've isolated themselves from the spot market.
Right, the spot market.
Yeah, you can think of the spot market as the Uber surge pricing of the ocean. It fluctuates wildly based on daily supply and demand. But by locking in fixed contracts, GSL doesn't care if the spot market crashes tomorrow because their ships are already rented out for the next 3 years at premium rates.
That makes a lot of sense. So their financial armor is thick, but that naturally brings us to what that armor is actually protecting them from. We really need to look at the physical reality of the oceans right now because the GSL presentation lays out a staggeringly long list of macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainties.
The map of global shipping is effectively being redrawn as we speak.
Yeah, the earnings report points to a cluster of major disruptions. There's the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the tensions between Israel and Hamas, deteriorating U.S.-China trade relations, tariffs, and disputes between China and Taiwan.
It's a lot all at once.
It really is. And just as a quick sidebar for you listening, when we talk about these conflicts today, we're looking at them strictly through the lens of a maritime logistics map. We aren't picking sides, endorsing viewpoints, or making political statements about these left-wing or right-wing politically charged conflicts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are strictly impartially reporting on how the source material views these events purely as logistical risk factors that affect global shipping routes.
And that's a crucial distinction for this analysis. In the context of maritime logistics, a geopolitical conflict is modeled simply as a physical barrier. It's a supply chain choke point that alters transit times and fuel consumption, regardless of the underlying political realities.
Right. And the physical barriers right now are unprecedented. The report notes that the Red Sea and the Suez Canal are effectively closed to standard container traffic due to the ongoing Houthi attacks. Ships are literally being forced to abandon that route entirely and reroute all the way around the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope.
Which is a massive detour.
Huge! According to the data, that single diversion is absorbing roughly 10% of the effective global shipping supply. And on top of that, the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf are in a state of limbo, with multiple regional ports suspending operations entirely.
What's fascinating here is the counterintuitive economics of all this chaos.
How so?
Well, if you are a retailer waiting for inventory, a blocked canal is a disaster. If you are the ocean carrier moving the goods, it's a massive logistical headache.
Yeah.
But if you are the company leasing the ships to the carriers, the dynamic flips entirely.
Ah, because it changes the math on ship supply.
Precisely. Let's look at the mechanics. When the Suez Canal is closed, a ship sailing from Asia to Europe has to go around Africa. That adds thousands of nautical miles and takes weeks longer.
Right.
When a single voyage takes weeks longer, the carrier suddenly needs 2 or 3 ships to maintain the same weekly delivery schedule that used to require just 1. The disruption literally eats up the global supply of available vessels.
And because we established that GSL operates like a landlord, all the extra costs of that longer voyage fall on the carrier, like the tenant pays the utilities.
Yes, exactly. The tenant the ocean carrier pays for the massive extra fuel burn, the crew overtime, and all the headaches of rerouting. GSL, as the landlord collecting a fixed daily rate, simply benefits from the broader macroeconomic reality, which is that the supply of ships has suddenly become incredibly tight.
Wow.
Yeah, the disruption creates scarcity in the market, and scarcity immediately increases the value of the assets GSL owns.
So if global routes are shifting away from the main highways and onto these longer regional back roads, what kind of ship do you actually need to survive? Because not all massive cargo ships are created equal.
Not at all. And this is where GSL's specific fleet composition becomes a massive strategic advantage. They don't own the biggest ships on the ocean. Their strategy focuses entirely on sub-10,000 TEU ships.
Okay, just to define that for you listening, TEU stands for 20-foot equivalent unit. It's basically the standard size of a shipping container. So a sub-10,000 TEU ship carries fewer than 10,000 containers.
Right. They specialize in mid-size and smaller container ships. You might see headlines about the massive 24,000 TEU megaships, but according to the data in the report, about 75% of global containerized trade volume is actually what's called non-main lane.
Meaning it's not traveling on the massive trans-Pacific routes from China to Los Angeles or the main Asia to Europe arteries.
Exactly. It's the regional trades, north-south routes, intra-Asia routes, trade lanes connecting smaller emerging economies in South America and Africa, and the massive megaships physically cannot service those routes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about it like this. The massive 10,000 to 24,000 TEU megaships are basically giant freight trains. They are highly efficient, carrying a massive amount of cargo in one trip, but they are completely restricted to a very specific set of tracks.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, they require incredibly deep water to avoid running aground. They need gargantuan port cranes to unload, and they can only stop at major central hubs. Whereas GSL's sub-10,000 TEU ships are like nimble delivery vans. They can navigate the shallow back roads, go point to point, and pull up to practically any regional port in the world.
The physical limitations of megaships are exactly why the delivery van analogy works so well. You physically cannot park a 24,000 TEU ship in most ports in West Africa or South America. The water isn't deep enough, and the local infrastructure would just collapse under the volume.
Right.
So in a world where the main tracks like the Suez Canal are suddenly blocked, you desperately need those flexible delivery vans to find alternative routes and keep regional trade functioning.
The report also mentions they focus heavily on ships with high reefer capacity. How does that fit into the delivery van analogy?
Well, it makes those vans highly specialized and highly profitable. Reefer refers to refrigerated cargo. This is the fastest growing and most lucrative cargo segment in maritime shipping. We are talking about fresh produce, temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals, and frozen meats.
Yeah, you can't exactly leave a container of medical supplies or fresh fruit sitting at a massive mega hub for 3 weeks, waiting for a smaller feeder vessel to take it to its final destination.
Exactly. It needs to move efficiently and reliably from point A to point B. Ships with high reefer plug capacity, meaning they have the onboard electrical infrastructure to power thousands of refrigerated containers. Simultaneously, they are perfectly suited for serving that 75% of non-mainland global trade.
Okay, so if these flexible, refrigerated delivery van ships are the absolute backbone of global trade right now, and they are basically printing money because of all these geopolitical choke points, why are competitors just flooding the shipyards with orders for these exact sub-10,000 TEU ships?
Well, the supply-side data is where you really see how tight this market is and why it's so hard to just build your way out of the shortage. First of all, ship recycling, which is the industry term for scrapping older vessels in 2025 and early 2026, is essentially sitting at zero. Everyone is in a total wait-and-see mode.
I mean, nobody is throwing away an old delivery van when demand is this high and you can still charge premium rent for it.
Nobody. And because of that, the idle capacity of the global container ship fleet is a microscopic 0.8%.
Wow.
Yeah, there is absolutely no slack in the system. Every available ship that can float is currently working. But here is the structural issue the industry is facing. 37% of the entire global sub-10,000 TEU fleet is over 25 years old.
37%. Wait, that's a massive chunk of the global fleet hitting retirement age all at once.
It really is. And the order book, which is the number of new sub-10,000 TE ships currently being built in the shipyards, is only 19.2% of the current fleet size.
Wait, so the number of new ships coming in is barely half of the number of old ships that are mathematically going to age out of the system soon. Why is the order book so low? If there is this much demand, why aren't the shipyards in Asia working overtime to build these mid-sized ships?
Two major reasons. First, shipyard capacity is finite. Right now, those yards are picked out for years building massive LNG carriers and ultra-large container ships that were ordered during the pandemic boom. You can't just slide a new order in for next Tuesday. It takes years to build a vessel.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, and perhaps more importantly, there is massive uncertainty around green fuel regulations.
Environmental mandates.
Yes. The International Maritime Organization is pushing for decarbonization. But nobody actually knows what the mandated fuel of the future will be in 2030 or 2040. Will it be green methanol? Ammonia? Advanced LNG?
So it's a huge risk.
Huge. If you are a ship owner, dropping $80 million on a new vessel today is a massive gamble if you pick the wrong fuel technology and your ship becomes obsolete or heavily taxed in 5 years. So they simply aren't ordering them.
And GSL is capitalizing on this scarcity in a way that honestly feels absurd when you look at the numbers. The report notes that they forward sold three of their older ships' vessels built between 2000 and 2002 for $52 million. But here is the kicker. These ships will be delivered to the buyers only after their current lucrative charters expire.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild maneuver.
Wait, let me get this straight. They have ships built before the first iPhone came out, and someone is paying $52 million for them today, but they can't even have them yet because GSL is still renting them out. That's like selling a used 1999 Honda Civic for over the original sticker price, but telling the buyer they can't have the keys until next year because you still need it to deliver pizzas.
It sounds absurd, I know. But in a market with zero slack, it's brilliant asset management. By doing that, GSL locked in an expected $25 million book gain.
Book gain.
Yeah, a book gain simply means they are selling the asset for significantly more than its current depreciated value on their accounting ledgers. They are effectively milking these aging ships for all they're worth, collecting premium charter rates right up until the very day they hand over the keys.
Because charterers are just that desperate to keep goods moving.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the maritime industry is facing what you could call a silver tsunami. The math is completely inescapable.
How bad is it?
Well, if all those 25-plus-year-old ships in the global fleet were suddenly forced to be scrapped today, either due to mechanical failure or strict new environmental regulations, the total sub-10,000 TEU fleet would actually shrink by a net 3.4% through the year 2030. And that is even after accounting for every single new ship currently on the order book.
That is wild to think about. We have a growing global population, we have increasing consumer demand for goods, we have structural geopolitical disruptions that require much longer voyages, and yet the physical fleet of the exact nimble ships needed to solve the problem is mathematically on pace to shrink.
This is exactly why GSL's existing mid-size fleet is generating so much cash right now and why they have the leverage to lock in those long-term contracts. The barriers to entry right now are insurmountable. You can't magically manifest a new ship, and even if you had the capital, the environmental regulations are just too murky to risk it. The existing mid-size fleet has become incredibly valuable real estate.
Okay, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've looked at how Global Ship Lease maintains a fortress balance sheet by stripping their break-even costs down to the studs.
Right.
We've explored how they use long-term contracts to insulate themselves from spot market panic and inflation. And we've seen how their specific fleet of flexible mid-sized delivery vans perfectly positions them not just to survive, but to actively capitalize on the geopolitical disruptions and the severe supply-side vessel shortages of the mid-2020s. So, what does this all mean for you listening? Why should you care about the daily break-even rates of mid-sized container ships or the environmental anxieties of global shipyards?
It's a great question because it affects everyone.
Exactly, because every single time you walk into a grocery store to buy imported fresh produce, or you order temperature-sensitive medicine, or you buy retail goods online, the price you pay at the register is quietly dictated by this exact maritime chess game. The global cost of living is directly tied to ship supply, debt structures, and whether or not a vessel can safely pass through a physical choke point.
Yep, it all trickles down to the consumer.
Which brings us back to that chaotic map we started with. If geopolitical tensions continue to simmer, permanently fragmenting global supply chains and forcing a real regionalization of global trade, is the era of the massive, highly efficient megaship coming to an end? Could it be that in a permanently divided, unpredictable world, smaller, ager, adaptable delivery van ships will become the most valuable real estate on the ocean?